title does not say anything about colleges, universities, or higher education. So I had a helper who put this thing in for me, and now what I suspect, having read that description, is that my helper got ChatGPT to write that description. So it's an interesting AI story, right? We need human intervention because it's actually really interesting. We've used ChatGPT quite a bit to help us with different kinds of materials and so forth. And I'm astounded at the level at which ChatGPT now understands this toolkit because we've fed a lot of information about this toolkit into it. But then when my helper asked it to write a description for this session, it forgot to mention colleges and universities. So that's kind of an interesting thing. But again, if you're not from a college or university, and even if you're not working with college and universities in your ecosystem, I think you're going to get a lot out of this because this set of tools and this framework, we have heard from ecosystem builders, not just college and university folks, is a really helpful way of thinking about ecosystem building and really taking action in ecosystem building. So that's what you're going to hear about today. Before that, let me introduce myself quickly. So my name's Jim Waddell. I have a firm called Venn Collaborative, and my firm works largely with colleges and universities on efforts related to entrepreneurial ecosystem building and also economic development more broadly. And in fact, also community development and workforce development. So I started the firm about 5 years ago, almost 6 now. Before that, I was Vice President for Economic Development and Community Engagement at the Association of Public and Land-Grant Universities. That's an association of a couple hundred predominantly research universities in the U.S. And I worked with our members on all these issues related to things like technology transfer or industry engagement or community engagement. So things that had to do with the way that the university engaged with the external world to help bring the assets of the institution to the external world and also to bring the assets of the community to the university to work together on improving the economy, enhancing the workforce, or developing better places to work and live. So that's my background, and that's kind of what I bring to this work. I mentioned that the Kauffman Foundation approached us to talk about this need, and they did that because prior to working on this toolkit, I was on the board of an organization called the University Economic Development Association, UEDA. And UEDA does just as suggested. It helps convene university folks around the economic development work that they might do. And we did something we call the Ecosystem Design Network. This was a pilot project where I forgot that I have a microphone here, I'm sorry. Angel, do you have my mic on? I'll start using this because I know they're wanting to record too. So we did this Ecosystems Design Network where we engaged a dozen universities across the U.S. and their ecosystem partners. So we had over 100 organizations engaged in this pilot where we used design thinking as a way of building ecosystems with colleges and universities engaged in and convening that process. So Kauffman found out that work was funded by a foundation called the Lemelson Foundation. And then Kauffman found out about this work and they got excited about this idea of colleges and universities really being engaged in ecosystem building and asked us if we could develop this toolkit. So I'm going to go into a lot of depth today about what this toolkit has in it, what it has in it for you, whether you're at a college or university or working with a college or university or not. As I said, I think you'll find that there's lots of stuff in here that can be really helpful. But first, we're going to start with something interactive. I hope you're all not like 2 food coma after lunch and you're ready to do something active. What we're going to do is we're going to have a couple of conversations here, okay? And we're going to have the same conversation twice, but it'll be a little different each time. So for the first few minutes, what I'd like you to do is just be in a pair or a triad. So if there's 3 of you at the table here, the 3 of you can talk together. If you're at a bigger table, then try to break into groups of 2 or 3. And what I want you to do is I just want you to spend about 5 minutes. I'll try to get everybody's attention again at the end of 5 minutes. I want you to spend 5 minutes just talking about this question. what are the kinds of actions we need to take to improve or strengthen, let's use the word strengthen, our entrepreneurial ecosystem. Now, of course, you're not all in the same entrepreneurial ecosystem, and that's okay. Just talk about, from your perspective, what are the things that need to be done to strengthen your entrepreneurial ecosystem? Okay, that's the conversation for about 5 minutes, okay? And go. Okay, caught up. So we're just having a conversation for about 3 minutes more. And here's the question. What are the things we need to do in order to strengthen our entrepreneurial ecosystem? Okay, and I know you're not necessarily all in the same ecosystem. And that's okay. Just talk about whatever kinds of things you feel like need to be done in your ecosystem. Okay? And then in a couple minutes, we're going to switch to another conversation. Okay, 2 more minutes. Coat to stay warm.
You need to be careful with this because right now we're good.
I gotta be careful not to bump into it. Okay, just 1 more minute. Okay. All right, that was 5 minutes. Could I have your attention again, please? Shh. Somehow that always works. Okay, so that was 5 minutes of good conversation about what kinds of things you need to do to strengthen your ecosystem. That's great. Not going to report anything out yet. First, I want you to have another conversation. But before you start this conversation, the first thing I want you to do is, does one person in your group have a piece of paper and a pen? Just need one person in the group with a piece of paper and a pen. And I want that person to do this on that piece of paper. So I want you to create a 2x2 matrix. And on one axis, Paul, what are the axes again? I know you know because you're a math person. Which one's the X and Y? Okay. The horizontal or X-axis, you're going to label feasibility. Okay? So on your 2x2 matrix, the X-axis is feasibility, and the Y-axis, the vertical one, is impact. So I want you to label the Y-axis impact. So what I want you to do now is have the same conversation you just did, but this time I want you to take all those ideas you shared about improving the ecosystem, and I want you to plot them. I want you to plot at least 4 ideas on this 2x2 matrix. So you're going to ask yourself, well, we have this idea about strengthening the ecosystem by creating a shared calendar of all of the events in the ecosystem. And okay, so where is that? Well, that could have a huge amount of impact because a lot of people then would be able to come to the kinds of things that we are doing in the ecosystem. But how easy is it? Well, we got to have somebody in each organization who can make sure they're doing the updates. And so maybe that's going to be over here, right? It might be high impact, but it might not be so easy. So what I want you to do is just take each of your ideas and assess them and plot them on this 2x2 matrix. Take the ideas you just talked about, or maybe you've got new ideas. Either is fine. You got 5 minutes again for this conversation.
Le pondríamos un poco más. Depende de la perspectiva de que si es bajar las actividades muy altas, pero la actividad de que eso pase.
2 more minutes.
Y el impacto.
Más como que un programa, algo así, como un calendario. Pero ¿qué sería algo? Un taller en la escuela o hacer como que un cohort con niños, como que no hay un premio en mi forza, hay un premio a toda la clase por colaborar y trabajar juntos. Y hacer como que un estudio así.
Más allá de eso, porque lo que podría ser de esa forma es como que bajar el nivel, algo que me ha funcionado en las clases de emprendimiento es que trato de implementar el concepto de que tú no tienes que ser mejor que nadie, pero tú sí tienes que ser diferente.
1 more minute.
Que realmente nunca estaban en la escuela, son un currículo nuevo, ¿verdad? Entonces como que muchas veces nos hacían un programa enfocado a adultos, pero no empezamos antes. Like we start too late. Ayudamos muy tarde, pues. O sea, si empezamos el development muy temprano, tarda más, pero es como es como entrenar para un maratón, o sea, tienes que correr, no tienes que entrenar desde un año para poder correr y seguir con eso, ¿verdad? Y nada, eso es lo que yo, de mi experiencia, ¿verdad? Que pienso que es una buena inversión.
Okay, that's another 5 minutes already. All right, ladies and gentlemen, could I have your attention, please? Shh. Thank you. All right. So clearly you got into some good conversation there. It was hard to get your attention again. I'm glad that you had some good conversation. Make sure that whoever was doing the writing on a piece of paper, that they pass it around so everybody can take a picture of it, because you're all going to want to remember this great conversation that you had, and you're going to want to remember those strategies that you talked about. What I'd like you to talk about now is, here's the good news, I'm not going to have you report out. So nobody at the table has to report out what the ideas were that you just talked about. But I do want you to share some thoughts with me. The thoughts I want you to share, though, are what were the differences in the experience of your first conversation versus the second conversation? How were they different? For better or worse, how is the first conversation different from the second? Yes, Paul.
Should I just?
Ahí está.
Hello. All right. The second time was a lot more focused on solutions. Just having to categorize them forced us to focus more on the solution as opposed to the problem.
Oh, so in the first conversation, you ended up focusing more on the problem. That's interesting. But because you had to think about this and map it.
I have to place it. So I can't place the problem in impact and feasibility. I can only place the solution.
I like that. That's great. That's a beautiful difference between the first two, between the two conversations. What else? What other differences?
I think that the first conversation.
Here, I'll give my.
I think that in the first conversation we were more pessimistic, and then in the second one we start being more positive.
That's great. That's similar to what Paul was saying, is that you began to focus on the solution rather than the problem. Good.
Yeah, I think in our case, we also, in the second round, were less pessimist because we were like, okay, so this thing that we know that the ecosystem in Puerto Rico needs, it's starting to be done. It's not perfect. It's not where we need it to be yet. So it needs improvement, but it's not like completely unfeasible or it's not being done. So we were able to identify that pattern.
That's great. So you can build on some things that have already been done. Is anybody here familiar with appreciative inquiry? Do you know that phrase? Go Google it, because I think you'll like, along this sort of strand of conversation that we're having, that's what appreciative inquiry is all about, is like talking about how do we move forward, building on the things we've accomplished rather than all of the problems that we're dealing with. Any other thoughts about the difference between the conversations? What about in terms of actionability? Oh yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, wait a second.
Gotta get on the recording.
So in the first conversation, when you would have identified the challenges, it gave you, well, it allowed everybody to say what their challenges were. But given that, in the second conversation, given that we understood that the challenges that we were experiencing were being experienced by other people as well, it made it into an easier conversation around finding a solution that can work for all of us.
I love that. Yeah. So it became more of a shared, rather than everybody just sort of talking about their issues, it became kind of like, okay, now we have to get together and solve something together. I like that. That's good. Anything else? What about action? Oh, go ahead.
So I think the second conversation, when we spoke about feasibility, that is where the challenge, because feasibility depends on the context and where you're from.
Right, sure, yeah.
So it might not be feasible for you.
Right.
It might not be feasible for me in my country. So I think when you're thinking about if it's actionable and can be actioned, that feasibility question was raised.
Yeah, thank you. And great point that it's difficult for folks sitting at a table from different ecosystems maybe to talk about feasibility because your own context is going to determine that quite a bit. But if you're in the same ecosystem and you're talking about feasibility, then as you suggest, taking me to my next point about actionability, you know, in the first conversation, you talked about a lot of things, but you weren't necessarily thinking about how we could actually do them, right? It was just sort of, here are all the things we need to do. But in this one, you had to actually talk about some specific actions you could take, because that's the only way you can really talk about feasibility. And there are probably some other differences as well. The point being that it's not bad to have open-ended conversations. We have them all the time, and they turn into great ideas, and they lead us down the path, but bringing some structure to conversations can also be really powerful and helpful. So why do I talk about structured conversation at the beginning of this? Well, as I mentioned, the C cube, the first C in C cube stands for conversations. So let me tell you a little bit about that, and then I'm going to show you our framework and what this toolkit is all about. So when Kauffman funded my firm, Venn Collaborative, and the University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh, to build this toolkit, we spent 6 months just in discovery. We partnered with a number of associations, the APLU, which is the association that I used to work for, NBIA, which is an entrepreneurial support organization association. We partnered with UEDA, the University Economic Development Association. I mentioned the National Association of Community College Entrepreneurship. USASB, the United States Association for Small Business and Entrepreneurship. So we had all these partners, and they helped us in a discovery phase by giving us access essentially to their members to talk to them about ways in which their ecosystem building had been a challenge, and in particular, ways in which it was tough to find the role for the college or university in ecosystem building. Well, we went through a lot of ideas in that discovery phase. We got a lot of input. We had all these focus groups, and man, we just talked to hundreds of people. But what it all kind of boiled down to for us in the end is that everybody keeps saying it's hard just to get the conversations going. You know, it's hard for a college or university to enter into something that's going on locally because oftentimes the college or university is the 800-pound gorilla, whether it wants to be or not. It's a big organization with lots of resources, or at least it seems like they have lots of resources. If you talk to the college or university, they will tell you they don't have lots of resources. But it is a big institution, very complex and so forth, and it can become really difficult to think about how do colleges or university play a role. But again, even with those institutions who said, we have great partnerships with external organizations, business and industry, community organizations, but ecosystem building is kind of a different thing because it's much more egalitarian, it's much more everybody brings something, it's less kind of structured, there aren't a lot of good models for it. So because of that, we don't know where to start this discussion with our ecosystem and how to be engaged in it. One quick side note, by the way, it's conversations for colleges and universities in building ecosystems. That word "in" was not there when we first created that name. It was just Conversations for Colleges and Universities Building Ecosystems. Why do you think we added the word in? Yeah, Paul. Say it one more time, and for the for the benefit of the recording.
To not exclude the ones that hadn't started yet, because we can talk about it and not be doing it yet.
That's right. And also, colleges and universities are not ecosystem builders, certainly not by themselves. But many of the college universities, even on that project that I worked on before we did this toolkit, they say, look, we want to be part of it. We have assets to bring to the ecosystem, but we don't want to be leading that. It's not appropriate for the college or university to lead ecosystem building. We want to be part of it. We want to engage in whatever way is appropriate. But it's not about us building the ecosystem. It's about us being part of that. So we added that word, but we did focus on conversations. And this all kind of culminated, by the way, all of this discovery work that we did. We had a big design workshop in Wisconsin last summer in which we brought people from all over the country to come and test some of the ideas that we were working on for the toolkit. And that was really the day that we decided that we were going to focus on conversations, because it just became so crystal clear that helping people have difficult conversations about the role of a college or university in the ecosystem was going to be important. And we also took inspiration from something called the Kauffman Playbook for ecosystem building. If you're not familiar with that, I'm assuming, do people in here even know what I mean when I say Kauffman, the Kauffman Foundation? Okay, yeah, most of you are familiar with that organization, I would imagine, given all of their work. In fact, they're kind of the people who created this organization, Jen, right? So, but they, for a few years, had a real strong focus on ecosystem building, and they built something called the Entrepreneurship Ecosystem Building Playbook. And if you just Google that, you'll find a great resource for ecosystem building. But one of the principles in that playbook is foster conversations, because it is through conversations that the information and resources that entrepreneurs need gets to them. And so, and it's also the places where ideas are generated and action is figured out and so forth. So we thought, well, all right, conversation in the end has to be our focus. So this is what we did. We created C-Cube. It's just C-Cube, so the word cube with a C in front, .tools. That's the website. So if you want to pull out your phone and follow along on your phone, you're welcome to. I'm just going to show you some different parts of the website, but the first thing I'm going to show you is this framework. So what we did was we thought about, well, what are the conversations about that folks need to have or want to have? So the first thing we had to do was to develop a framework for our conversations. So without going into too much depth about how we came up with each of these things, I'm going to go down the left-hand side of this matrix first. There are 4 themes that the framework is based on. The first one is value and purpose. What is the value that our ecosystem creates for the entrepreneur or other participants in the ecosystem, or for the community? Context and environment. What are the various environments and contexts in which our ecosystem exists? There are cultural contexts, there are geographic contexts, there are political contexts. So what are those, right? How do we come to understand those? The third theme is assets and roles. So you have lots of different pieces of the ecosystem, and some of those assets are physical or capital assets. Many of them are people or organizations. So therefore, also, what are the roles of those different kinds of assets? And finally, what are the links and connections that need to be made between those assets and roles in order for us to strengthen our ecosystem? So those were 4 themes. All of this is on the website, by the way, so don't feel like you have to capture it all in notes. This website is all live now, so. We also talked about 3 stages, because when we did this discovery work, we saw that people were at different places in their ecosystem building. Interestingly, just like in some quantum kind of way, they were in multiple places all at once. And you might find that as you look at these boxes, you might go, oh yeah, well, we're kind of in the discovering stage when it comes to value and purpose, but I feel like we're really in that doing stage when it comes to links and connections or whatever. But the point is that This is not a linear model. You're not supposed to go start at the top, go left to right, then go to the next row and go left to right. It's about figuring out where your ecosystem is on whatever topic and seeing if you can find some resources that are helpful to you. So we find that, there are different stages going on in the ecosystem. You might be in the discovering stage when it comes to one aspect of your ecosystem, but you might be very much in the doing stage when it comes to another aspect. So what we did was we put all of those themes and stages on a matrix, and that ended up creating 4 times 3, 12 topics. And those topics are in these boxes in the middle. And these topics were just a way of thinking about, helping people think about what kind of conversation do I need to have right now with my colleagues in the ecosystem. So if I were to ask you to kind of take a look at these boxes, and I'm trying to scroll so you get a sense of them, do any of them stand out to any of you? Like, oh, that's kind of where we are right now in our ecosystem. That's what we need to do. Are any of them speaking to you? Or is nothing speaking to you because of lunch? All of them. That's too easy. Oops. Okay. Well, does anybody see one that speaks in particular to what you're up to right now in your ecosystem? You're all like, I didn't know I was going to have to think coming into this session. That's okay. It wasn't in the very long description that ChatGPT wrote, and forgot to mention colleges or universities. Yes. Anyway, when you do have a chance to explore the framework, I encourage you to just ask yourself that. Which of these sound like us right now? And then go and explore that particular topic. So let's say, for example, that you want to explore assessing alignment and gaps. When you get to that topic page, you're going to get a little bit more information. You get sort of a general description about what it means to assess alignment and gaps in your ecosystem. Some considerations, just some things that you should be thinking about. So if you can see, if you picture yourself as an ecosystem builder in your ecosystem right now, I'm hoping that you're seeing some things that are just going to help you prompt some thinking that's going to start moving you forward. And that was the goal here. At the very bottom of the topic page, you'll find the heart of this toolkit, what we call our conversation guides. So in this particular case, our conversation guides are about evaluating the gaps across multiple higher ed institutions. So one of the things we heard a lot was that from ecosystem builders, by the way, not necessarily higher ed folks, but we'd hear there's like 5 colleges in our town, and they can't seem to get themselves together at all to help figure out, to help us figure out how we can access their resources as a group. So we put in a conversation guide about that. Evaluate resource alignment is another one of the conversation guides, and then assessing stakeholder engagement is another one. I'm just going to pull up an example of one of these conversation guides. So if you did the math, you know that there are 12 topics, 3 conversation guides for each. We have 36 conversation guides total on the website. So hopefully you'll go through those and you'll find something that's helpful. Now they're very text intensive, as you can see, but you'll notice that they are bullets but not numbers. So one of the things we tried to do is not say, you have to have this conversation like this. We just kind of put in some bullets and said, think about doing this, bring your participants together, have them think about this, and so forth. But you're going to adapt it to whatever your environment is. You may have a conversation with a group of colleagues in a meeting, sitting at a table, or you may do like a half-day symposium, which is what some of our pilot users did, where they brought in 40, 50 stakeholders, and then they had guided conversations for an afternoon. But so we give you some ideas about how to have the conversation. We usually use a particular format. I was talking with you earlier, Carlos, about rosebud and thorns. Has anybody ever used rosebud and thorns in workshops or anything? Rosebud and thorns is where you say, we're going to talk about the roses with this initiative. What are the things that are really blossoming and doing really well? What are the buds, the things that are just starting to emerge but are very promising? They're going to look pretty soon. And what are the thorns, the things that are really our sticking points? So rosebud and thorns is one of the kind of frameworks that we use in some of these conversations, but that's just an example. The other thing we do is we try to give you a tool or a framing to capture your conversation. So I talked about a 2x2 matrix. This particular tool happens to use a 2x2 matrix. So if you're assessing stakeholder engagement, you're putting your stakeholders on this 2x2 framework, which has on one axis what stakeholders can bring and what matters to them on the other axis. And that helps you kind of assess what kinds of next steps you need to take with different stakeholders in the ecosystem building work that you're doing. So I'm not going to go through a whole bunch of these conversation guides. I think you get it, right? This is what we try to do, is create a tool to help you have a structured conversation. And by the way, many of these tools say higher ed institution, college or university. When we talked to people throughout this process, and we talked not only to college and university folks, but also to ecosystem builders, all kinds of organizations, entrepreneurial support organizations, and so forth. And many of them told us, we could use that. And we don't even need a college or university there for it to be helpful. So I encourage you to think about how can you use these conversation guides, whether or not you're trying to figure out a higher ed role, because we designed them specifically with that in mind, that we wanted them to be helpful to all kinds of people in the ecosystem. So I encourage you to go and explore them. Before I go on to show you a little bit more about the toolkit, are there any questions about the conversation guides or why we structured things that way? No? Is this seeming like it? Yes.
This is what we can be able to do. Oh, sorry. Do I need to repeat again, right? Oh, okay. So are there examples of ecosystems that you guys have worked with that we can be able to go maybe visit the webpage and kind of like show the result of you know, or the impact that these guides could have?
So I don't think we have anybody that has put up a website or anything about what they've done. But if anybody's interested in talking, so we did this summer, or spring rather, we did a pilot activity. We called it the Ecosystem Conversations Challenge, and we gathered up a bunch of people who were interested in using the toolkit. It was a little bit like Survivor. Not the actual using the toolkit part, but just getting to the point where people were using it. We had like 50, 60 different ecosystems that were going to participate, and it kept winnowing down. By the time we really dug into it, we had 10 ecosystems participate in our pilot. But those 10 ecosystems participated pretty intensively. And 8 of them, I think, were led by a college or university, and 2 were actually led by an entrepreneurial support organization. So if you would like to learn more about what each of those ecosystems did, because we haven't done a good job, other than in our report to Kauffman, reporting on what they did, I would be happy to put you in touch with any of those people. In fact, if you wanted to reach out to me and just say, who were they? I'll tell you who they were, and then you go, oh, that's the one I want to talk to because they're like us. So I'd be happy to make those connections. Yeah.
Thank you. So obviously ecosystems have different partners with different missions, visions, even though we're supporting the same people. But I was thinking, is this tool also helpful for teams within those already structured organizations within the ecosystem?
That's a great question, I forget whether you were at a college or university, are you?
No, I work at a nonprofit, Puerto Rico Science Trust.
Okay.
Yeah, with an incubator, yeah.
You work with Denise.
Yes, she's a colleague of mine, yeah.
Denise is great. I love her. But yeah, how big is the Science Trust, by the way? How many people?
We have a little bit over 300 employees, but we have almost 20 programs. So each program works with their own particular. We're in the entrepreneurial pillar, so we have a incubation program called Fase Uno, but then we have our colleagues within the same pillar that run an accelerator program, which is Parallel 18, and their sub-programs. So even though we're in the same matrix organization, we have different programs, different staff, with different missions, with different publics that we attend to.
You just, I mean,
It's
you're
a whole
only
bunch of stuff. It's a whole bunch of people.
You're only 300 people, but you just described what a college or university
Yeah,
is like, right? Like
sort of, yeah.
So, in fact,
Sorry.
this is one of the issues that kept coming up is that, and by the way, in the history of my work in this field, which has been about 15, 20 years, this is always comes up, that the organization itself that wants to be part of the ecosystem isn't itself behaving well as an ecosystem, right? It really needs better interconnections. So in fact, as you explore the conversation guides, you're going to find a number of them that are about aligning things within the institution.
Yeah.
But all you have to do is replace institution with organization,
Yeah.
and you could use those tools.
With a program
Yeah.
specific. And
But then even any of the other tools, many of them, I should say, are going to be applicable whether you're focusing just on your organization or the broader ecosystem.
Yeah.
In fact, we heard from some people, well, we knew that we wanted to have this conversation with our external stakeholders, but it was much safer for us to have it just with people inside the organization first.
Yeah.
So they did that conversation, and then they did
go
it
outside.
with,
And I think in our case, that's great because we have the entrepreneurial pillar that has right now 4 programs and other sub-programs, so we can sort of start the discussion there and then broaden and include other key players, but we can start within our pillar,
and I think
within
that's
our
a
organization.
beautiful undertaking. So when I used to do this work at the association and worked with all these research universities, my colleagues and I had a saying, which is, be the ecosystem you wish to see in the world, which of course was totally stealing from, I guess, Mahatma Gandhi is the person
from be
who
the
said
change
that.
you wish to see in the
Be
world.
the change you wish to see. We would say be the ecosystem, meaning if you're going to play a role in creating the ecosystem in your region that you want to see, then you should be that ecosystem first. Start with that. So I love the direction you're going in, and I think you'll find some tools that are really helpful.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, well, let me show you a couple other things on the toolkit just so you have an orientation to it. So we have this whole section here called ecosystem building. So this is just where we share some ideas about issues in ecosystem building. Probably many of them are very familiar to you, but some of them might be things that you want to dig deeper on. We have an article about what is entrepreneurial ecosystem building. We have a framework. So that's basically an article that just goes into much more detail about how we created our 4x3 matrix framework. We have a piece on centering diversity, equity, belonging, and inclusion. That piece is actually authored by Faye Horwitz, who some of you might know from an organization called Forward Cities that does a lot of equitable entrepreneurial ecosystem building in the US. We have this piece about conversations. Why conversations, and why are they important to ecosystem building? We have a piece on metrics and measurement because that's something that everybody always asks about and talks about. We also have a conversation guide or two, by the way, about developing success metrics. We have something just sort of about the values of the toolkit, why higher ed institutions are important to ecosystems, and some key terms. And so, by the way, all of these articles we'd like for you to use as tools to share with others in your ecosystem to say, hey, we think we need to talk about this idea. So, and feel free to put your name on them. Like just put those things out there and say, hey, look, we got some smart ideas here that we'd like to talk to you about. So that's what the ecosystem building section of the website is. I've already talked about the framework part. In the how-to section, we have some tools that we hope will help you think about how to make use of the toolkit. One is just sort of like, here's how it's organized and how you can navigate it. This one, getting ready for ecosystem conversations, this came up because one of those 10 organizations that participated in our conversations challenge, it was a 3-month activity. So the end of March was the end of the activity. And one of the organizations, the University of Maryland, they did their first conversation as part of the challenge on the last day of March. But that's because they wanted to participate, but as they sat down to start thinking about how do we do these conversations, they kept going, we haven't had enough conversations to the point here internally yet that we feel comfortable going out to the external ecosystem and engaging these kind of conversations. So we wrote this article about that idea that you may not be ready to jump into these conversations. Here's some homework that you can do to get there. Is anybody here a consultant like me? Oh, good. This article here is for you. If you're doing any consulting about ecosystem building, we want you to use this toolkit and, make it your own. It's, by the way, this is totally freely available, Creative Commons license. You can use it even for commercial purposes. All we ask is that you attribute where the material came from. And so it's a great tool for consultants. It gives you a frame for helping your clients do ecosystem building. We have suggestions about how you can build your own conversation guides, different scenarios that you might use it in. So I mentioned how some people would have a meeting of 5 people. Another person told us they did this big half-day symposium where they brought people together. Another person told us, I didn't have any conversations that I facilitated. Instead, I went through all 36 conversation guides and highlighted questions. And every time I go to meetings about our ecosystem building, I bring that list of questions with me and I make sure I ask the ones that are relevant. So there's all kinds of ways you can use the toolkit. We talk about intended audiences. And this last tool, I'm kind of excited about. We added it right at the end. I was in a session earlier today about teaching entrepreneurship. Was anybody else in that session? Anybody here engaged in teaching entrepreneurship? Great. Well, one of the questions I asked in that session was, should we, or do we, when we teach students about entrepreneurship, do we teach them about the value of ecosystem building? Or do we just focus on teaching them how to be an entrepreneur? I think we should be teaching students not only how to be a good entrepreneur, but also to be aware of what an ecosystem is. Those resources that come to them as an entrepreneur don't just come out of nowhere. It takes intentionality and a lot of other things. And I think it's important not to necessarily say they're going to have a lot of time to do ecosystem building as an entrepreneur, but I think it's super important that they learn about it. So what we did was we turned C-Cube into a teaching tool. So if you go into this page about teaching ecosystem building, you'll find a simulation guide. So it talks a little bit about teaching ecosystem building and why it's important. But at the bottom, there's a link to this simulation guide. And so the idea is we've written up something like 30 roles that your students might play, like local policymaker or economic developer or whole variety of roles. And the idea is that as a faculty member, you might engage your entrepreneurship students in playing these roles and using the C-Cube toolkit to have conversations playing those roles about, playing those different kinds of ecosystem roles. Okay, that's ecosystem building and the how-to. Again, I already went through the framework. I'll just point out that we do have a resources section that lists a bunch of other kinds of resources that you may find helpful in ecosystem building. I do want to encourage you to please go check out the About page when you learn about the toolkit, because this is where we talk about all those great partners that we worked with. And we'd love for you to know about who those folks are. I mentioned them, but I want to point out quickly this join section. And then I want to give you a few more minutes to ask any questions. Who's familiar with the Ecosystem Building Leadership Network? Anybody? Okay, this is a project that's been going on in the US for a couple of years, again, funded by the Kauffman Foundation. And the idea is to help ecosystem building grow as a practice, right, as a field of work. At EBLN, and I say we because I'm on the leadership council for EBLN, we have a community website, and now I'll say they, we at EBLN offered to host on our community website the community for C-Cube. So if you click on that on the website, you can go here, and I encourage you to sign up, because not only are you going to have access to the C-Cube community, you're going to have access to this great broader EBLN community, and there are all kinds of great people talking about all kinds of ecosystem building issues there. And then we also, of course, have a link to a page where you can sign up for emails. I think that's on here. Oh no, that's under contact. So if you go to the contact page, you can click on a link, and I would encourage you, if this is at all of interest to you, to please sign up for that email list. One last thing I want to show you is, very quickly, this is a page on my firm's website, so it's going to just take me a second here. can't type. Should have pulled this up earlier. This is really awful, my eyes. We had so much success. Please be that. I hope I didn't misspell anything. We had so much success. Oh, nope. vencollaborative.org. C-cube. Okay, I'm not going to bother with this because I don't want to take your time away. If you go to my organization's website, vencollaborative.org, right at the top, there's a link that says CQ Peer Learning Roundtables. Encourage you to go check them out. Or before you leave, come grab my business card, and it's got a QR code on it that you can just point to, and that'll take you right to that page. The reason I wanted to tell you about it is because this pilot that we did, we had so much success with it. People loved getting together. We got together on Zoom every couple of weeks. They talked about what they were doing in their ecosystem using the toolkit. They shared ideas, strategies, and so forth. Every once in a while, we'd put together a little bit more content for them, stuff that wasn't on the toolkit. And they really loved that experience. They loved having a community to implement this with. Well, we were able to do that for free because we had a grant. Grant's over, so now we have to charge for this. But if that's at all of interest to you, having a community of other institutions or ecosystems to go through the process of using the toolkit, the way it's going to work is we have an 8-week process. Once a week, we get together on Zoom. We share new content with you about a series or a variety of ecosystem building issues and topics. A couple of times throughout the 8-week period, we're going to summarize lessons learned and provide recommendations for how to implement those learnings in your ecosystem and so forth. So please check it out or come get my card. I'm happy to talk to anybody who might be interested in that kind of community-based way of engaging with the toolkit. And with that, we did get started a little late, so I'm going to take the privilege of another few minutes if people do have questions. But thank you very much for your time, too, and listening, and I hope that you found something here that's helpful. Any questions? Thoughts, ideas? Yes, sir. Okay, she's on the way with the mic, the required recording.
Just to obey the rules. Is there any assessment form for you to help you figure out where you are in terms of a phase along the different themes? Or is this a self-assessment by reading through what's each?
That's a great question. And it came up a couple of times as we were developing this toolkit. People were saying we really need to help people figure out where they are on that matrix and all those topics. The thing in the end was that our advisory board kept saying to us, no, it really should be choose your own adventure, right? Like people should go in there and they should kind of assess on their own where those things are relevant. And especially because, like I said, it's sort of quantum. You're in a couple of those places. You have superpositionality or whatever that right word is. You're in a couple of those places at once. Now, we did still talk about doing an assessment tool just to help people kind of navigate and find their way. Of course, we just ran out of time and grant money and we couldn't do it. But that's something we would love to add is some kind of assessment tool to help people figure out where they are in their ecosystem building and what kinds of conversations would come next. By the way, there is if you're interested in assessing your ecosystem, not necessarily kind of from this perspective, but I mentioned that organization Forward Cities. They have a whole ecosystem assessment tool that I recommend. So make sure you Google Forward Cities and take a look around their website. Forward Cities, yeah. Anything else? Well then, thank you once again for your time. I have a stack of business cards here. I'm so excited to actually have real business cards again because I haven't had them since the pandemic. And I'm happy to hand out a bunch of business cards. So please do come and grab one your way out. Thank you very much for your time today.